3 weeks ago, a mob of people in matching shirts descended upon my property line, demanding I open my gate for the homeowners association. I settled into my lawn chair, popped open a chilled beer, and held up a scorecard. I gave their synchronized march a 7.5 for effort, deeming it terribly out of step. They likely perceived me as just another obstinate landowner. Little did they realize I had high-definition surveillance, documented proof of their transgressions, and an informant poised to dismantle their entire association. My response was concise: my land, my terms. But to comprehend the absurdity of that spectacle, one must first understand two fundamental elements: the land itself and my grandfather. Locals here often remark that Texas soil possesses a memory, recalling the imprint of boots, the fury of storms, the thunder of hooves, and the stirrings of trouble. And if you remain long enough, it remembers you, too. I've occupied this 12-acre parcel situated just east of town for the majority of my existence. Not continuously, mind you. Life's currents have pulled me away on occasion, as they do for everyone. Yet, like a mariner who has exhausted every other charted course, I invariably find my way back. The land patiently awaited my return. The dwelling, a sturdy, unyielding structure predating most unions in this county, listed slightly westward as if possessing all the time in the universe. And perhaps it did. My grandfather, Earl, erected the initial iteration of this homestead with his own hands. He held the conviction that a man's worth was diminished unless he left behind something capable of weathering a significant gale. Out here, winds do not seek permission. They simply arrive. He would often impart, "Son, you don't merely possess land, you tend to it so that it may sustain you." I believed him then, and my conviction has only deepened, for this terrain, this boundary, this gravel artery, this venerable workshop, exuding the aroma of diesel and cedar, has indeed sustained me. The driveway alone stretches 1/4 mile. Much of it remains the original gravel my grandfather meticulously laid down in 1967, utilizing a rented grader and a mule that harbored a distinct aversion to mornings. It commences from the county road, meanders around a cluster of pecan trees, and culminates at a robust iron gate emblazoned with my surname across its center. It's the kind of portal that communicates unequivocally, without a hint of aggression: turn back unless you are expressly invited. Most residents in this vicinity show it deference. The elder generation, in particular, favors its implicit message. Privacy is an increasingly scarce commodity these days, much like tranquility. But on my land, quietude was not a visitor. It was a permanent resident. Mornings commenced at a leisurely pace. A cup of coffee on the veranda, my canine companions at my feet, the sun ascending with a soft orange hue behind the cedars. Occasionally, I would linger long enough to witness the dust settle upon the road, fully cognizant that no one would be traversing it unless they had a deliberate purpose. That kind of serenity cannot be quantified in minutes. It is measured in breaths. My workshop, a long, low structure, stood a short distance away, incrementally expanded each time my grandfather succumbed to boredom or frustration. Within its confines resided an array of tools that had outlasted the majority of the men who procured them. A tractor that persevered through sheer obstinacy, a trait that seemed to be passed down through generations, and a multitude of unfinished projects awaiting my decision on what truly mattered. Life was unpretentious, and there was no need for it to be otherwise. I possessed ample space. I had quiet. The distance separating me from the nearest human dwelling afforded me the liberty to enjoy my coffee in my undergarments without the slightest apprehension of a call to the authorities. That is a form of liberation unattainable in manicured residential developments. For an extended period, I remained undisturbed. The mail arrived on its own schedule. The dogs barked when the mood struck them. The seasons transitioned in their unhurried cadence, and the only regulations that held sway were those etched into the very earth. Then, Clearwater Ridge materialized. It commenced with survey markers, small orange and pink flags that proliferated across the road like an invasive weed. Subsequently, trucks arrived, Concrete was poured and framing crews mobilized. Within a year, a fully realized HOA development had sprung into existence as if from a prefabricated epidemic. They christened it Clearwater Ridge, a designation that struck me as ironic given the distinct absence of anything clear within a 10-mile radius, only scrub, dust, and a creek that only remembered its hydrological identity during periods of excessive rainfall. They erected those residences with alarming speed, excessively so, all aligned behind a whitewashed stucco wall and a prominent decorative sign adorned with elegantly cursive lettering. It presented the facade of a gated paradise for individuals who preferred their world pre-approved and pre-packaged. Out here, we refer to such embellishments as a concession for those lacking self-reliance. Presiding over that diminutive dominion was their president, Karen Sterling. Her archetype is familiar, encountered in countless scenarios. The sole distinction here was her official title. Her hairstyle was severe, her attire pressed with a crispness that mirrored her humorous flatness, and her voice possessed the capacity to transform the word community into a veiled threat. During public forums, she likely portrayed herself as a guardian of neighborhood order. To my perception, she was merely someone who revered rules as sacred, provided she was the sole author of each and every one. Initially, I paid them no mind. They adhered to their side of the thoroughfare, and I remained on mine. They could concern themselves with lawn heights and fence aesthetics indefinitely. It held no consequence for me. Their world revolved around matching mailboxes and the drama of newsletters. My world consisted of bruised knuckles and a gate that yielded only to authorize passage. However, a singular complication presented itself: geography. The rear expanse of their development bordered untamed territory, dense brush, rocky terrain, and uneven ground. This presented no facile access for heavy vehicles, emergency responders, or any of the accoutrements typically paraded by a pristine new HOA. The sole feasible ingress was through my southern gate, which opened onto my private gravel roadway, a road my grandfather painstakingly carved into this very land with sweat, diesel, and considerable expletives. They observed that road and saw convenience. I saw the very foundation of my lineage. They desired it. I declined. As simple as that. But with individuals of their ilk, a refusal is not an endpoint. It is an invitation to escalate, and that precisely is when the true disruption commenced. They wasted no time. Merely 3 days following the inaugural ceremony of Clearwater Ridge, I detected movement near my southern gate. 2 men clad in reflective vests, accompanied by an individual in a sharp navy polo, stood as if awaiting permission to proceed. Even from a considerable distance down the drive, I could ascertain the leader. The gentleman with the clipboard, his shoulders squared, chin held high, a smile that was a peculiar blend of salesman and intimidator, the sort who had likely never exerted themselves with anything more substantial than their own inflated ego. I ambled toward them, wiping grease from my hands with the same rag I had employed earlier that morning. My dogs followed at my heels, akin to canine deputies. The clipboard-wielding individual advanced, his smile radiating with an intensity that suggested it should be equipped with a dimmer switch. "Good morning, sir," he began. "We represent Clearwater Ridge Community Logistics. We would appreciate temporary passage through your gate for a few days. We require access for construction vehicles and equipment deliveries. It would considerably alleviate our logistical challenges." He delivered the request as if bestowing a favor. I glanced at the gate behind them, then back at him. "This gate?" I inquired. "Indeed, sir," he affirmed, nodding with an air of preordained approval. One of the other men interjected, "Concrete trucks are scheduled for Friday. Your road represents the most direct access point." I neatly folded my rag, not for the sake of tidiness, but because silence often reveals true intentions. "This roadway is not a public thoroughfare," I stated. "It is documented on my deed and absent from your development plans. You are aware of this." The clipboard holder's smile faltered, a minute crack appearing, but I observed it. "We are prepared to offer compensation," he suggested, abandoning the pretense of neighborly discourse. The HOA is willing to provide a generous remuneration. I shook my head slowly, my gesture conveying a definitive and final refusal. I have already conveyed my disinterest to your president, I replied. This is not a logistical impediment, it is a matter of boundaries. The clipboard holder opened his mouth, presumably to deliver a pre-rehearsed HOA talking point, but I did not permit him. I interrupted him, not with anger, but with a sense of finality. My land, my rules. The atmosphere shifted perceptibly, not a gust of wind, not a breeze, but that profound, silent alteration that occurs when one realizes a decision is immutable. Their amiable expressions dissolved like poorly applied masks. The clipboard holder turned to a fresh page in his folder. You may come to regret this, he murmured. I offered a smile. But mine was not a friendly encounter. You gentlemen are standing on private property without authorization, I stated. This constitutes trespassing. This discussion is concluded. I retrieved my mobile device and dialed the sheriff's non-emergency line. Their posture immediately transformed, stiff, defensive, and visibly frustrated. They departed before Deputy Miller arrived, their tires spitting gravel with a sound that conveyed a distinct warning. Miller took my report with a resigned sigh, the kind that emanates from a man who understands that trouble rarely presents itself only once. Overzealous suburban types, he muttered, yet his eyes conveyed a clear understanding. He knew this would not be the sole occasion he would traverse my private lane. The subsequent morning proved his prescience accurate. Upon stepping outside, I discovered HOA pamphlets wedged into my gate's hinges, tucked within my mailbox, and dispersed across the gravel as if a misguided attempt to vandalize my property with glossy propaganda. Bold red headlines blared, blocking community infrastructure, endangering public safety. He is putting us all at risk. They had even concocted a dedicated website. I neither became enraged nor vociferous, nor did I resort to any physical actions. I simply affixed an additional lock to the gate, welded a second bracket onto the post, and mounted a new surveillance camera on the eastern perimeter fence. If they sought conflict, they were about to receive an education. The quietude that enveloped my property following that gate confrontation was not one of peace or restfulness. It was the hushed stillness that observes from the tree line, patiently awaiting one's next move. And I was acutely aware of the HOA's predictable next step. Individuals of that disposition do not comprehend the word no. They interpret it as a directive to exert greater effort. Consequently, I prepared myself. I dedicated 2 full days to upgrading every surveillance camera on my property. Thermal sensors, night vision lenses, motion detectors, everything interconnected within a closed-loop system with automated cloud backups every half hour. Not out of paranoia, but from a lifetime of experience that has taught me trouble seldom announces its arrival with polite double knocks, and precisely on schedule, trouble manifested. At 2:31 in the morning, my phone vibrated once on the nightstand. A silent alert indicating motion along the eastern fence line. I extricated myself from bed, slipped on my boots, donned my jacket, and stepped out into the crisp night air. No panic, no haste, just a deliberate, unhurried stride toward the workshop while simultaneously reviewing the live feed on my device. 2 figures, attired in black, navigated along my fence with the practiced grace of performers rehearsing a clandestine burglary for a community theater production. One carried a flashlight, its beam directed low. The other bore a toolkit of considerable size, an indication that their intentions extended beyond mere idle curiosity. They were there to dismantle something. I activated the silent alarm. Floodlights positioned near the front gate flickered to life at half intensity, sufficient to illuminate their presence without alerting them to my observation. They reached the gate. The individual wielding the toolkit produced a portable grinding tool, activated it, and pressed it against the steel locking mechanism. Sparks erupted like agitated fireflies. Their efforts were futile. That lock was triple reinforced steel, encased within armored shielding, yet their attempt alone revealed the full extent of their nefarious intentions. Subsequently, the second individual produced a folded document. Beneath the beam of the flashlight, I identified the header. It bore the semblance of a court order, or perhaps a hastily fabricated imitation thereof, and the insignia on his vest read, Riverbend Enforcement Officer, a designation that exists solely within the fervent imagination of an HOA president who harbors the delusion of ruling her own sovereign territory. I neither shouted nor rushed forward, nor did I attempt to intimidate them. At times, the most judicious course of action is to allow individuals to document their own culpability in high definition. From my vantage point behind the tractor shed, I meticulously filmed the entire event, the grinding tool, the counterfeit documentation, the theatrical badge, every ill-conceived decision made under the guise of enforcing compliance. Then, I detected the luminescence of headlights cresting the distant ridge. Red and blue lights followed in swift succession. Deputy Miller and a second patrol unit arrived with haste, their tires kicking up dust. The instant the deputies observed sparks emanating from my gate, they activated their loudspeaker. Hands up. Step away from the property. The individual with the grinder dropped the tool as if it had inflicted a painful bite. His accomplice attempted to flee, managing approximately 15 feet before tumbling face first into the mud with a sound that offered considerable satisfaction. By the time I emerged into the light, both were apprehended and cuffed on the ground. Miller cast a glance in my direction. Mr. Saltz, he stated, this is becoming a frequent occurrence. Before I could respond, the individual who had been wielding the grinder spoke, a torrent of panic and falsehoods pouring forth. Wait! This is a misunderstanding, he yelled, his face pressed into the dirt. Karen said it was authorized. She assured us we had immunity. She promised she would handle all the paperwork. His partner groaned audibly. Dude, just stop talking. Miller remained impassive, yet he tapped the microphone affixed to his vest, a deliberate resonant tap. The unspoken message was clear. Your confession is being recorded with perfect clarity. Continue speaking. I responded with a shrug. Only when the HOA resorts to such creative measures, I remarked. Miller offered no discernible smile, but the corner of his mouth twitched just enough to convey his understanding. This was not an isolated incident. It was the genesis of an outright conflict. Deputy Miller wasted no time once the two intruders were secured. He summoned a second unit to maintain the integrity of the scene and collected the fabricated court order. The younger deputy handled it with latex gloves as if it posed a potential hazard. Even from a distance of 3 feet, the document's deficiencies were glaringly apparent. The font was incorrect. The notary seal appeared to have been reproduced via an inferior copier, and the signature, well, if the perpetrator's intention was to mimic a judge's signature, they must have executed the task while riding in the back of a truck traveling at 30 miles per hour. The deputy held it aloft, presenting it to Miller. Are you seeing this? Miller responded with a slow, single nod, the sort of gesture men exchange when they have unearthed a problem they had hoped to avoid. He then addressed the individuals on the ground. All right, gentlemen, he began. Help me comprehend something. Why the grinder? Why the falsified documentation? And why 2 o'clock in the morning? Initially, both remained silent, the kind of silence that descends when one realizes their chosen strategy has proven ineffective. Then, the individual with the grinder faltered once more. I told you, Karen said it was authorized, he exclaimed. She assured us she would handle immunity, the paperwork, everything. We were led to believe this was merely a formality. The other man uttered a low curse under his breath. Man, shut up. Miller offered no direct response. He simply adjusted his vest, ensuring the body camera maintained an optimal angle, and inquired, And who is this Karen? Karen Sterling, the HOA president, the man blurted out. She hired us, said she needed early access to the road. She termed it expedited compliance operations. Miller blinked deliberately. That's not a recognized procedure, he stated. HOAs do not possess enforcement officers. They do not issue court orders, and they certainly do not authorize break-ins at 2:30 in the morning. The other deputy was already relaying the details via radio. I remained silent. My input was unnecessary. Events were unfolding with an almost orchestrated precision without any need for my intervention. Once the deputies had escorted the two individuals to their patrol cars, Miller gestured me over. "Do you have footage of this?" he inquired. "Every angle," I confirmed. "Night vision, audio, and a clear close-up of their rather amateurish cosplay badges." Miller exhaled a long, low breath. "Excellent. The sheriff's office will require copies. This extends beyond simple trespassing. Forged documents, impersonation of officials, attempted forced entry. These individuals are in serious legal jeopardy." He paused, then added, "And if their statements regarding this Karen individual prove true, she may well find herself in even greater difficulty." I acknowledged his statement with a nod, having anticipated as much. He entered his cruiser, his hand resting lightly on the door. "Deliver that footage to the station first thing in the morning," he instructed, "and ensure that gate remains securely locked until we resolve this matter." "That was already part of my plan," I assured him. They departed, their flashing lights gradually receding into the darkness like the conclusion of a lengthy exhalation. I lingered by the gate for a considerable time, allowing the night to envelop me once more, observing the wind carry away the faint, acrid scent of burnt metal. A man can sense, deep within his being, when a boundary has been transgressed, and tonight mine had been stomped upon with both boots. By dawn, I had compiled every second of recorded footage, synchronized the audio, and delivered the complete package to the sheriff's department. They required no further prompting. Evidence of such a nature is not retained idly. It belongs in the hands of those capable of acting upon it. By midday, the investigation had been officially launched. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, the HOA issued a statement, a polished PDF disseminated across their website, dispatched via email to residents, and even affixed to the entrance gate of Clearwater Ridge. It read, "The Riverbend Homeowners Association dissociates itself from the unlawful actions of an independent contractor. We are shocked and profoundly disappointed by this individual's behavior, which is not representative of our commitment to community safety." Translated into plain English, we never anticipated he would be apprehended, but their campaign was far from over, not by a significant margin. That same evening, I discovered newly printed pamphlets strewn across my fence line once more. This time, however, they did not pertain to infrastructure or public safety. These were directed at me, filled with accusations, speculation, and stern warnings to residents regarding the purportedly hostile disposition of the landowner across the road. One even featured a crudely zoomed-in photograph of my gate, adorned with poorly photoshopped crime scene tape. The quality of the editing suggested the work of a teenager attempting to present a meme as credible evidence. I nearly chuckled. Nearly. But instead, a profound quietude settled within me. A steady, resolute calm that signaled the HOA's complete lack of comprehension regarding the character of the man they were antagonizing. One does not dedicate a lifetime to safeguarding what is rightfully theirs, only to capitulate to a cadre of polo shirt-clad bureaucrats attempting to rewrite reality. They presumed I would yield. They anticipated my capitulation. They believed fear would prove more effective than bribery, yet all they accomplished that night was to expose the full extent of their ruthlessness, and that consequently placed the next move squarely in my court. The HOA's escalation was not long in coming. They had already exhausted avenues of charm, veiled threats, fabricated documents, and a midnight intrusion. Their subsequent logical progression, it appeared, was public spectacle. 2 mornings following their disingenuous pronouncements of shock and disappointment, I stepped onto my porch with a freshly brewed cup of coffee, only to witness something I hadn't encountered on this road in 2 decades. A gathering, comprising approximately a dozen individuals, clustered along the edge of my property line, resembling a flock of bewildered flamingos. They maintained a safe distance, carefully avoiding any act of trespassing, yet positioned strategically to ensure their homemade signs were clearly visible to me. "Let us through. Emergency access saves lives. Share the road. Salts." One woman proudly displayed a neon poster that proclaimed, "Don't be selfish. Think of the community." It was embellished with actual glitter at 7 o'clock in the morning. I offered no verbal response, no shout of protest, no inclination to approach them. Instead, I retrieved a lawn chair, a portion of beef jerky, and a cooler containing 2 chilled beers, settling myself beneath the shade of the pecan tree as if observing a 4th of July parade. After a brief interval, I returned to my residence and emerged once more, this time bearing a small, dry erase board. With a large red marker, I inscribed bold strokes. I held it aloft, displaying the numeral 7 followed by a decimal point and the numeral 5. A hush fell over the assembled crowd for a fleeting moment. Then, an elderly gentleman positioned near the forefront bellowed, "What in the blazes is that supposed to signify?" I raised my voice just enough to carry. "Your marching formations are disorganized," I called back. "If you intend to protest, at least achieve some degree of synchronization. Focus on your arms, your knees, your rhythm." A few individuals huffed audibly. Several muttered disgruntled remarks. One woman gasped as if she had personally endured an egregious offense. I consumed another bite of jerky, leaned back in my chair, and added, "Come now, demonstrate some genuine effort." Approximately half of the assembled group appeared uncertain whether to feel insulted or embarrassed. The remaining half clearly lacked any discernible understanding of their presence there. However, herein lies the crucial aspect of such gatherings. It is seldom the boisterous individuals that warrant concern. It is the quiet one, the one whose gaze drifts around as if assessing the presence of potential witnesses. Indeed, around mid-morning, an individual arrived who deviated from the established retiree aesthetic of the HOA. Apparent age in the late 40s, a baseball cap pulled low over his brow, a polo shirt stretched tautly, 2 sizes too small, his shoulders rigid with tension. He proceeded directly towards the gate, as if carrying an official warrant in his pocket. He commenced taking photographs, initially of the gate, then of my residence, and finally of me. I rose deliberately, ensuring my hands remained clearly visible, and my GoPro camera, affixed to my cap, was already emitting a steady, red blinking light. "May I be of assistance?" I inquired. He paid me no mind, snapping another photograph, this time zooming in. I reiterated more firmly, "Sir, you are encroaching on the easement. Please step back." Instead of complying, he advanced. "You," he bellowed, "the land grabber, the one obstructing emergency vehicles, the one jeopardizing families." I remained composed, my demeanor unruffled. "This is private property," I stated. "You need to move away from the gate." He continued his advance, closing the distance uncomfortably, and then made a dramatic gesture towards my shoulder. It wasn't a strike, not physical contact, merely a perfunctory brush of fingertips against my jacket. Then he crumpled to the ground as if struck by a bullet. Clutching his face, he began to wail. "He hit me! He assaulted me! Call the authorities!" Cell phones materialized instantly. Shouts erupted from the gathering onlookers. Someone shrieked, "Good heavens, did you see that?" Yet all I did was indicate the small, pulsating red light on my cap. The GoPro was meticulously documenting every second. My vocal intervention was unnecessary. The deception was already dissolving. The man who had theatrically thrown himself onto the dirt continued his lament as if he had been upended by a wildebeest rather than mere gravity and theatrical ineptitude. He writhed, cradling his face, imploring someone to summon law enforcement, vehemently asserting that I had attacked him without provocation. A woman, sporting a pink visor, gasped as though she had witnessed a homicide. Another cried out, "That's an assault. I saw it." Despite the fact that she had been engrossed in her phone moments prior, I remained motionless, made no move towards him, and made no attempt at self-defense. I simply lightly touched the side of my cap where the GoPro was affixed, its diminutive red indicator light blinking with a slow, steady rhythm. Evidence possesses a greater persuasive power than alarm. By the time Deputy Miller, the same officer from a previous encounter, arrived, the performer was still prone, emitting theatrical groans, holding a tissue beneath his nose despite the complete absence of any bleeding. Miller alighted from his patrol car with the placidity of someone accustomed to the myriad deceptions people attempt. He surveyed the onlookers, then the man on the ground, and finally me. "All right," he inquired. What transpired here? The actor sprang to a seated position as if a switch had been flipped. He assaulted me, he vociferated. He just approached and shoved me. I wish to press charges. Miller gave a slow nod, as if allowing the pronouncement to settle before deciding its ultimate destination. You wish to press charges? Absolutely, the man snapped, pointing at me with the accusatory fervor of a character identifying a culprit in a low-budget courtroom drama. Miller turned his attention to me. Do you have footage? I remained silent. I simply reached up, detached the GoPro, and presented it to him. Then I gestured towards the gate, remarking, the security camera also provides a clear vantage point. A ripple of discomfort passed through the onlookers, their phones lowered, their expressions shifting. Miller returned to his cruiser, connected the GoPro to his tablet, and commenced reviewing the recording. The throng fell silent. Even the actor ceased his moaning. I observed Miller's countenance as he viewed the video. His brow remained immobile. He neither sighed nor smirked, merely observed. Then he replayed the critical sequence in slow motion, and that was the conclusion of the matter. Case closed. He exited his vehicle holding the tablet at his side. Sir, he addressed the actor, would you like to amend your statement? The man faltered, his gaze darting towards the assembly, but pride, as is often the case, proved a potent catalyst. He lifted his chin. Well, he began, perhaps it wasn't quite so severe. Miller interjected, turn around. What? Miller repeated, already unfastening his restraints. Turn around. A collective murmur of astonishment swept through the crowd. Several individuals recoiled. One woman whispered, "Oh my goodness, oh my goodness!" The actor sputtered, "What do you think you're doing? He assaulted me." No, sir, Miller stated with an even tone. You have submitted a false police report and attempted to defraud law enforcement. That constitutes a criminal offense. He snapped the handcuffs shut around the man's wrists and escorted him towards the patrol car. The same individuals who had been vociferously protesting half an hour earlier were now folding their signs, averting their gazes, and shuffling back to their parked SUVs, much like adolescents sneaking home after curfew. One woman muttered under her breath, I didn't realize they were going to go that far. Indeed, madam, whatever narrative you find most comforting. As the actor was being placed in the rear of the vehicle, a voice from the dispersing crowd called out, We didn't sign up for this. However, in essence they had. They simply had not anticipated the swift collapse of the prearranged scenario. As the cruiser departed, Miller cast me a significant look, a mixture of apology and caution. This is escalating, he said quietly. You should exercise prudence. I acknowledged with a nod. Prudence is my forte, I replied. He offered no argument, simply drove away. The perimeter of the fence returned to its previous quietude, perhaps too quiet. For if the Homeowners Association was so desperate as to orchestrate an assault, their machinations were far from concluded. This was merely the overture. Disruption often carries a distinct auditory signature. It is not found in shouting, brawling, or even the report of firearms. Rather, it is the slow, resonant crunch of tires on gravel, succeeded by a deep diesel thrum that your very being registers before your ears can fully process it. I recognized that sound the following morning. I was engrossed in the intricate mechanics of an aged Massey Ferguson tractor when the noise reverberated across the property like an ominous herald, not a mere truck or delivery vehicle. This harbored a palpable weight, a discernible intent. I emerged from the workshop, wiping my hands on a discarded rag, and there it was, a vibrant yellow excavator, its treads churning the earth on the far side of my boundary fence. 3 individuals, clad in high-visibility vests, accompanied it. One held a clipboard, another carried fluorescent survey markers, and the third wielded a can of fluorescent spray paint. Their demeanor was devoid of confusion or disorientation. They projected the certainty of men who had received unequivocal authorization to be present. I proceeded directly towards the fence line, neither rushing nor dawdling, but with the measured gait of someone whose dominion extended to the very soil beneath their feet. The individual with the clipboard observed my approach and adopted what he likely considered his most genial expression. "Good morning, sir," he called out. "We are merely preparing the ground for a temporary access route. It's only surface grading, nothing structural." I met his gaze intently. Under whose directive? He consulted his clipboard as if expecting the answer to materialize spontaneously. "As per community project management directives, a temporary equipment pathway." "That's rather amusing," I countered, positioning myself directly at the fence. "Because this land is mine, and no one has seen fit to grant me any authorization whatsoever." He shifted his weight, his eyes flicking towards his companions for support. "Sir, we were informed this was pre-approved." "By whom?" I inquired. A pause, a perceptible swallow, and then, "Karen." I inclined my head slightly. "I confess I've never heard of her." Before he could offer a reply, the man with the spray paint stooped and marked a vivid orange X directly upon my fence post, precisely on my boundary line. Not adjacent to it, not in its vicinity, but upon it. "My post," I stated calmly. The man with the paint froze mid-action, as if suddenly realizing his entire livelihood hinged on feigning ignorance of my declaration. Behind him, the excavator operator leaned out of the cab. "Do you want us to proceed with the initial excavation?" he inquired. "No," I responded, then raised my voice. "Nobody touches that fence." The man with the clipboard attempted another smile, but this time it more closely resembled the grimace of a man battling nausea. "Sir, please. We were assured." I retrieved my mobile device. "Allow me to assist you with that assurance," I said, and promptly initiated a call to the sheriff. Immediately thereafter, I contacted the county zoning department. While awaiting their arrival, I meticulously documented the scene. The markers, the paint, the documentation, the idling machine exuding an aura of latent menace. The workers attempted to appear occupied, striving to avoid exacerbating the situation. Some paced aimlessly, others pretended to measure non-existent objects. One individual stared intently at his boots, as if harboring a secret desire for spontaneous vaporization. 45 minutes later, the county inspector arrived, a weary gentleman with spectacles and sturdy boots, his age predating the entirety of the Clearwater Ridge development. He traversed the site with me, examined the markers, noted the paint, surveyed the perimeter, and then registered a frown. "Do you gentlemen possess a permit?" he queried the workers. Silence. "Do you have survey markers?" he continued. More silence. "Do you have anything at all that indicates your authorization to be present?" The clipboard man's voice cracked. "We were instructed—" "That is not the question I posed," the inspector snapped. When the sheriff's deputy arrived, a different individual this time, the workers retreated from the fence with a speed I had never before witnessed among adult men. "Sir," the deputy addressed me, "it appears you apprehended them before any damage occurred." I nodded. "Damage is not the primary concern," I stated. "Intent is." The deputy did not offer a refutation, and just like that, the workers demobilized, the markers were retracted, the spray paint was capped, and the excavator lumbered backward like a chastised hound. However, the damage had indeed been inflicted, not upon my property, but upon the HOA's strategic approach. For today they had unequivocally revealed their hand. This was not a matter of miscommunication. It was not born of misunderstanding. It was a deliberate, orchestrated attempt to infringe upon my boundary through the utilization of heavy machinery, contracted personnel, and an outright fabrication, and that signified one crucial outcome. Their objective was no longer negotiation. It was outright appropriation. As evening descended, the atmosphere acquired that palpable stillness that presages an approaching thunderstorm, not in the heavens, but within the populace. I sensed an imminent disturbance. The excavator incident had clearly unsettled someone within the Clearwater Ridge administration. The workers had departed as if fleeing a spectral encounter. The inspector had left with a countenance of exasperation and suspicion. And somewhere within that HOA clubhouse, I was confident at least one individual had finally grasped the gravity of the situation. Karen Sterling had irrevocably crossed a line that none could subsequently follow her across. I merely lacked the knowledge of precisely who that individual might be. Around 9 o'clock in the evening, as I was securing the workshop, I detected the sound of approaching footsteps near the gate. It was not the heavy, presumptuous tread of an HOA official, nor the furtive stealth of an intruder. This was hesitant, uneven, reminiscent of someone approaching a confrontation they dreaded. The dogs, sensing my observation, merely lifted their heads and watched. I stepped outside, a flashlight in hand, and directed its beam towards the roadway. A man stood there, clad in pressed khakis and a button-down shirt, a laptop bag slung across his shoulder. He seemed vaguely familiar, in the manner one might recognize a stranger encountered fleetingly in a grocery store aisle. He raised a hand. "Mr. Saltz, may I speak with you for a moment?" His voice quivered, not from the cold, but from the palpable awareness that his presence was unsanctioned. I opened the gate partially and stepped out, maintaining a prudent 3-foot separation. "That depends," I replied. "Who are you?" He swallowed audibly. "My name is Tyler. Tyler Manning. I am the treasurer for Clearwater Ridge." I maintained an impassive facade, but internally a realization dawned. This was not a man arriving with a mere warning. This was a man burdened by a profound predicament. He glanced furtively over his shoulder twice before continuing. "I did not come in my capacity as a board member," he stated quickly. "I came as a homeowner, and I need you to comprehend. I have no intention of disputing the road access or any related matters. I can no longer be complicit in what is transpiring." He rubbed his palms on his trousers as if experiencing a profuse perspiration. I offered no haste, no solace, merely awaited his disclosure. Men invariably reveal their truths when one ceases to press them. He exhaled shakily. "You are not the antagonist they are portraying you to be," he declared. "And what occurred today? That excavator, it was not an accident. Karen authorized it. She informed the board it was pre-negotiated and pending county approval." He shook his head vigorously. "I verified. None of that was accurate." I offered a single nod. "Continue." Tyler opened his laptop bag and withdrew a small envelope, its thickness suggesting it was densely packed. He extended it towards me, as if it possessed the potential to inflict a burn. Within it lay a USB drive and a sheaf of printed emails. "I should not possess this," he whispered. "And if she discovers I copied it, she will ruin me." He drew a faltering breath. "She has already attempted it." Now, he had my undivided attention. Tyler's gaze fell, his expression one of shame. "Look," he began, "as treasurer, my responsibility is to ensure our financial records are impeccable. Standard procedures, dues, upkeep, vendor agreements. However, over the past 6 months, there have been irregularities." He ran a hand through his hair. "Substantial payments, off-the-books transfers, accounts designated as security operations and resolution strategy. 40,000 here, 60,000 there, some routed through shell corporations, some paid in cash." I raised an eyebrow. "And who authorized these transactions?" His voice wavered. "Karen." Then he corrected himself. "Only Karen." He looked up at me, his eyes conveying a mixture of apology, terror, and profound exhaustion. "Mr. Saltz, there is in excess of $300,000 unaccounted for." The figures did not surprise me. The desperation in his voice, however, did. He moved closer, still holding the envelope between us. She informed the board that these represented expenditures for community protection, legal preparation, and conflict mitigation, but the invoices do not align. The vendors are fictitious. The invoices are fabricated. "And you are coming to me," I stated slowly, locking eyes with him at last, "because she is going to scapegoat me." There it was. The true impetus. Not a crisis of conscience, not a surge of heroism, but pure self-preservation. Tyler's voice broke. "She has already established the narrative. I discovered an email. She drafted a statement asserting that I acted unilaterally, that I mismanaged funds, that I authorized contractors without board consent. He swallowed again. But I did not authorize anything. She forged my initials on 2 of the transfers. I remained silent, allowing him to continue his confession. When the break-in occurred, he said softly, the fraudulent court order, the badges, the grinder. That was not an unauthorized contractor. It was paid for through an account Karen established herself. I checked the ledger. He closed his eyes momentarily. Tonight she convened an emergency closed session. I was not invited, but one of the board members leaked me a message. She stated, and I quote, he pulled a folded printout from his pocket and handed it to me, highlighted in red. We can outlast him legally. Even if we are in the wrong, the pressure will compel him to capitulate, and if anything goes awry, the treasurer will bear the consequences. Tyler looked like a man who had been treading on dangerously thin ice for an extended period. I cannot risk imprisonment for something I did not do, he whispered, and I cannot allow her to implicate the entire community in this. So, I have brought you everything. He gestured to the envelope. It is all there. Emails, meeting minutes, transaction logs, copies of forged approvals, plans for the break-in, plans for the excavator incident, plans for more. I accepted the envelope but did not immediately open it. I should not be here, he stated, his voice trembling anew. If Karen discovers I spoke with you? She won't, I assured him. He nodded, though it offered little solace. Before turning to depart, he paused. You are not the only one she has harmed, he said quietly. You are merely the only one who is not intimidated by her. I watched him walk back towards the development, a man who had finally chosen a side, even if he detested the circumstances that necessitated it. The night swallowed him whole. I stood there alone, the envelope in my hand, certain of one immutable fact. Karen Sterling had not merely initiated a conflict, she had provoked the wrong adversary. In a small town, news disseminates uniquely, not with haste nor with sluggishness, but with a steady persistence, akin to wind carrying dust or creek water finding the most yielding path. By the following morning, a significant portion of the county had encountered rumors of an excavator, a falsified court order, or an HOA incident proximate to my fence line. The specifics varied depending on the informant. Some individuals exhibited curiosity, others skepticism, and a few were outright intrusive. Instead of allowing Karen to manipulate the narrative into whatever grim bedtime story she preferred, I resolved to present all the facts openly. I dispatched a dozen brief electronic messages, 3 to local journalists whom I trusted, several to neighbors, and a few to individuals who had previously posed inquiries within the community. The email was concise. I will be hosting a community transparency open house this Saturday at my property. All are welcome to pose questions. Documentation will be provided. Feel free to bring anyone you wish. No anger, no theatrics, no shouting, merely illumination. And illumination is the sole element that individuals like Karen cannot endure. The morning of the event dawned hot and blustery. I erected 2 portable canopies at the entrance to my driveway. One covered a table laden with meticulously arranged documents, while the other was staffed by 2 of the young individuals I had been mentoring in my workshop. They offered complimentary blade sharpening for lawnmowers and garden tools, which attracted a larger contingent than anticipated. Few things foster community cohesion as effectively as complimentary services and chilled beverages. By 10 o'clock, the initial visitors arrived. A retired couple from an adjacent county, a father with 2 young children eager to view the tractor, and a man residing 3 houses into Clearwater Ridge who confessed his waning trust in the neighborhood newsletters. Subsequently, the journalists appeared. Not the high-profile urban reporters who descend with elaborate microphones and depart before learning anyone's name, but the local journalists who had grown up in the area, who understood property boundaries more intimately than some surveyors, and who could discern the scent of diesel fuel and pecan trees. They posed direct questions, and I provided straightforward answers. I escorted them along the fence line, indicating the post where the spray-painted marking had been. I demonstrated the location where the excavator had been positioned. I elucidated the history of the roadway, recounting how my grandfather had excavated it with a rented grader in 1967 and how the deed had remained within our family for longer than Clearwater Ridge had existed on the county map. Within the tent, I displayed maps, historical plat maps, title transfers, and tax records dating back half a century, the sort of documentation that commands respect from individuals over 55 as it represents tangible substance, not mere digital representation, not easily altered, but the product of lived experience imprinted in ink and official stamps. Adjacent to these were laminated copies of the Clearwater Ridge buyer agreement with a single line conspicuously highlighted in bright orange: southern ingress and egress not guaranteed or implied. Attendees read it and shook their heads. One man muttered, "They purchased homes without reading this." Another commented, "It sounds like someone misled them." I offered no further commentary. It was unnecessary. The documents spoke for themselves. Tyler Manning also made an appearance, this time without his HOA identification tag. No pressed khakis, just jeans and a t-shirt resembling any ordinary man seeking respite from the sun. He maintained a position near the periphery of the tent, deliberately avoiding the reporters, occasionally casting furtive glances over his shoulder as if anticipating Karen's arrival, brandishing a clipboard filled with impending repercussions. He spoke sparingly, but the expression in his eyes conveyed sufficient information. He had concluded his involvement with the HOA, the deception, and the pervasive fear. Around midday, a few Clearwater Ridge residents began to arrive in small groups. Some were driven by curiosity, others by guilt, and some by the nagging of their conscience, which had finally become more insistent than their designated Facebook forum. One woman approached me cautiously, clutching her purse as if it were a shield. "I apologize," she said. "We were unaware. We believed you were being unreasonable." I offered a polite nod. "My intention is not to humiliate anyone," I stated. "I simply wish for the truth to be acknowledged." She exhaled a breath she had likely been holding for weeks. "Well," she remarked, "today has certainly been enlightening." By late afternoon, the gathering had swelled to such a degree that my driveway felt almost festive. Children chased each other with abandon. Thermoses of coffee clinked. My apprentices sharpened mower blades with such efficiency that they began receiving gratuities, and the reporters diligently scribbled notes as the sun illuminated the documents on the tables, resembling evidence meticulously presented. However, the most significant transformation was not in the attendance, but in the absence of certain individuals. The HOA's Access Now Facebook group fell into an unnerving silence. No protest signs, no demonstrators, no staged provocations. Karen Sterling had effectively vanished from public view. Whether she was regrouping or succumbing to panic, both scenarios served my advantage. As the last visitors gradually departed and the sun descended behind the cedars, I packed away the documents, folded the tents, and stood in the cooling air, a profound sense of quietude descending. For the first time since this entire predicament had commenced, the wind no longer conveyed a sense of impending threat. It felt like a shift, a transition, a signal that the narrative had transcended the mere confines of a gate. It was now a discourse on truth, finally amplified to the point of drowning out falsehoods, and the subsequent action would not originate from my initiative. It would emanate from Karen, and it would prove to be her most consequential misstep. The Travis County Courthouse carries a distinct aroma, a combination of aged paper, wood polish, recirculated air, and an palpable undercurrent of tension, a quality that resonates deeply within one's very being. I arrived early. My shirt was pressed, my boots polished. The sort of attire my grandfather reserved for momentous occasions. Inside the courtroom, the Riverbend Homeowners Association's legal contingent sat huddled together as if connected by a single anxious consciousness. Their suits matched, their notebooks were identical, and their apprehension was palpable. At the heart of this nervous cluster sat Karen Sterling, her jaw clenched so tightly it seemed poised to fracture. She refused to meet my gaze. Behind her, the association's treasurer, Tyler Manning, presented a stark contrast to his previous appearance. He was no longer cowering or visibly afraid. He simply appeared resigned, finished with the ordeal. The judge entered, his sharp eyes and silver hair betraying a man with no tolerance for trivial matters. The case was Riverbend HOA versus Mr. Saltz, a petition for a temporary access easement. "Counsel, you may proceed," the judge commanded. The HOA presented their case first. Their attorney rose, a practiced smile fixed on his face, ready to launch into his performance. He presented aerial photographs, conjured hypothetical emergency scenarios, and displayed flowcharts adorned with a labyrinth of arrows. He even dared to suggest that my secured gate posed a threat to regional resilience, a concept whose meaning remained utterly obscure. Next, they brought forth their so-called expert, a man who spoke in a dense, jargon-filled discourse. His words were an abundance of filler, utterly devoid of substance. To cap off their presentation, they submitted a collection of deliberately staged photographs depicting an ambulance purportedly blocked by my gate, an event that had never transpired. Karen Sterling nodded along, like a marionette on a string. Then Miss Davis stood, and the atmosphere in the room palpably shifted. She moved with the composed assurance of a surgeon who already foresaw the outcome of the procedure. First, she presented my property deed. Then, the original plat map from 1967. This was followed by 55 years of property tax records for the private road. Subsequently, she revealed photographic evidence of the excavator trespassing onto my property. She pointed to the paint markings on my fence post, the brightly colored flags, and the individuals involved in the intrusion. The judge leaned forward, intently observing. Miss Davis then stated, "And when outright trespass proved insufficient, Your Honor, they escalated their tactics." She tapped her laptop. The courtroom lights dimmed. The screen illuminated with footage of a nighttime break-in. The unmistakable sight of a grinder spewing sparks. A counterfeit Riverbend enforcement officer's badge. A forged court order, its text marred by mismatched fonts, and an invalid notary stamp. The HOA's legal team visibly recoiled. When the spectacle of criminal entry failed to achieve their desired outcome, Miss Davis clicked again. The helmet camera footage began to play, showing a man in a polo shirt staging a shouting match, followed by a theatrical collapse into the dirt as if struck by invisible lightning. A few individuals in the gallery audibly scoffed. Someone whispered, "Good Lord!" The judge's expression remained impassive, which somehow amplified the chilling effect. Miss Davis then placed another document under the projector. "Here," she declared, "is the $500 payment receipt for that individual's appearance fee, an expenditure authorized by President Sterling." Karen Sterling's complexion turned ashen. "And now," Miss Davis continued, "we address the very foundation of this dispute." She presented the Clearwater Ridge Buyers Agreement, the very document each resident had signed. The judge's gaze settled on a highlighted clause. "Southern ingress and egress not guaranteed or implied," he read aloud. A profound silence fell over the entire courtroom. "Miss Sterling," the judge stated, his voice even, "were the homeowners fully informed of this specific clause?" Karen Sterling opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. Miss Davis then gestured towards the judge's bench. "Your Honor," she announced, "the treasurer of the HOA board wishes to offer testimony." Tyler Manning stood, walked to the front of the room, raised his right hand, and took the oath. He glanced at me briefly, offered a subtle nod, and then turned to face the judge. "Mr. Manning," Miss Davis began gently, "please inform the court of your discoveries." Tyler swallowed audibly. President Sterling deliberately misrepresented that clause to the homeowners. She assured them the Southern Road was under negotiation and pending approval. She deliberately withheld board votes and authorized harassment payments disguised as contractor fees. Miss Davis handed him a document. "And what was the total sum of these unauthorized expenditures?" The room was utterly still. Tyler looked down at the figure, his voice a mere whisper, yet amplified clearly by the microphone. $300,000. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. The judge's chin lifted, almost imperceptibly, a subtle judicial signal of deep disapproval. "And when you questioned President Sterling regarding these missing funds," Miss Davis pressed, "what was her response?" Tyler's voice firmed. "She told me she would implicate me. She said I would be the scapegoat. She stated that the treasurer always takes the fall first." Karen Sterling abruptly lurched to her feet. "That's a fabrication. He's twisting the truth." The judge's gavel struck the bench with such force that half the room flinched. "Sit down." Karen Sterling sank back into her chair as if her bones had dissolved. Miss Davis concluded with precise clarity. "Your Honor, this petition is not about access rights. It is about asserting control, engaging in retaliation, fabricating authority, and committing financial misconduct." The judge's deliberation was brief. "The HOA's petition is hereby denied, with prejudice. Furthermore, based upon the compelling evidence of document tampering, fabricated incidents, and the alleged misappropriation of $300,000 of community funds, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for a thorough criminal review." Karen Sterling's expression was akin to someone abruptly unplugged. Her attorney's gaze remained fixed on the floor. A murmur swept through the gallery. I offered no smile, no outward sign of triumph. I simply exhaled, a long, steady release of breath I had held captive for many months. The conflict was far from over, but the landscape of the battle had decisively shifted. Karen Sterling was no longer the hunter, she had become the hunted. 2 days after the court hearing, the atmosphere surrounding my property felt distinctly altered. It wasn't peaceful, precisely, but it was quiet in a way that suggested the opposing party was no longer strategizing. They were in a state of frantic disarray. My wait for confirmation was short. Early that morning, just as the sun began to burn through the lingering mist, my phone vibrated with a message from Tyler. "County auditors are here. They're asking questions." I stared at those words for a considerable moment, a moment where a smile wouldn't surface, but a profound sense of release emanated from within. Later, he added, "Karen didn't show up." I felt no need for popcorn. The day was already providing its own spectacle. Around noon, a local reporter contacted me. "Mr. Saltz, we've received confirmation that a financial review has been initiated into the Riverbend HOA. Would you care to offer any comment?" "No," I replied, "but I will certainly be listening." She chuckled. "It looks messy. Truly messy." Messy was an inadequate descriptor. By mid-afternoon, word had disseminated throughout the community that the county auditor had identified multiple irregularities within the HOA's financial system. These irregularities perfectly aligned with the data contained on the USB drive Tyler had provided me. Consultant fees, expenses categorized as security operations, cash payments to contractors made off the books, invoices bearing labels such as resolution strategy, community response, and unplanned compliance measures. The aggregate of these questionable transactions amounted to a sum just shy of $307,400. Compounding the issue, half of these expenditures had been approved without any formal board vote, while the remaining half had been deliberately obscured within fabricated maintenance line items. This was not merely mismanagement, it was outright fraud, and the county had seen enough to act. The HOA board convened an emergency meeting that very evening, a meeting whose gravity was somewhat diminished by its location within a clubhouse constructed from cheap stucco and the lingering guilt of its original developer. Residents filled every available seat, with standing room spilling out into the hallways. I did not attend. It was unnecessary. I simply sat on my porch with a chilled beverage, allowing the evening breeze to carry the distant echoes of raised voices from across the road. While I couldn't discern every word, I caught enough to grasp the sentiment. "You lied to all of us." "Where is the money, Karen?" "The judge ordered a criminal referral." "We trusted you." Trust, I mused, is akin to a fence post. Once it splinters, it can never be truly rejoined, and replacement is the only recourse. The meeting, I later learned, concluded with a motion to suspend Karen Sterling from her HOA presidency pending a thorough investigation. Naturally, she refused. Individuals like Karen Sterling do not readily relinquish power. They tend to dig in their heels. However, digging proves futile when the very ground beneath you is about to collapse. The following morning, the county issued a public statement confirming the possibility of criminal violations under financial fraud statutes. Residents began arriving at my gate, not to argue, but to express their apologies. Some offered homemade pies, others a firm handshake, and many offered awkward half smiles, accompanied by the distinct look of individuals who belatedly realize they have backed the wrong contender. I accepted every apology, not out of any personal need, but because forgiveness incurs no cost, while harboring grudges demands considerable effort. The true spectacle unfolded 3 days later. I was engaged in welding a support brace onto my eastern fence line when I heard the sound of sirens. They were not fast or frantic, but steady and deliberate. I straightened up, wiping my hands on my trousers. A sheriff's SUV proceeded into Clearwater Ridge, followed by another, and then a county investigator's sedan. They did not turn towards the clubhouse. Their destination was Karen Sterling's residence, her expansive, meticulously maintained home, approved by the HOA, complete with manicured shrubs and a custom door glass fashioned into the shape of a pelican. Residents peered from their windows, some ventured onto their porches, and a few even emerged with their phones poised, not in an adversarial posture, but with the characteristic curiosity of small-town dwellers who sense something significant is unfolding long before they comprehend its full scope. Karen Sterling appeared on her porch, adorned in a crisp white blouse, a smile plastered across her face that seemed entirely out of place. She spoke of misunderstandings, procedural errors, and politically motivated audits. The officers did not engage in debate. They stepped forward and read the charges: fraud, conspiracy to commit trespass, misappropriation of community funds, authorization of staged incidents, and tampering with documents. As handcuffs were fastened around her wrists, she gasped as if her very breath had been abruptly severed. Her reaction was not one of anger or confusion, but sheer astonishment. The profound shock of witnessing reality finally present itself with official paperwork. One of the deputies guided her towards the waiting SUV. And then it happened. The moment no one had anticipated, the element that no scriptwriter could have envisioned with such dramatic effect. A gust of wind stirred, and behind Karen Sterling, the HOA's decorative entrance sign, a simple metal frame, rattled conspicuously. It read, "Riverbend Estates, a community of trust." A neighbor stepped forward, phone in hand, recording the scene. Another whispered, "Well, that certainly hasn't aged well." Karen Sterling lowered her head, but the cameras captured every detail. The ignominious walk, her final glance at the sign she had once proudly stood before, and the chilling realization that the community she purported to protect was now watching her depart in handcuffs. The HOA was dissolved 2 weeks later. The state's decision was swift and absolute, their license revoked, all operations suspended, and a temporary state-appointed overseer tasked with sorting through the financial wreckage. Tyler declined the nomination to lead the newly formed board. I couldn't fault him. He stopped by my place one evening, hands in his pockets, his eyes weary but carrying a lighter burden than before. "I never wanted it to reach this point," he admitted. "I know you didn't," I responded. "Do you hate us?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, but I'm keeping my gate closed." A small, sincere smile touched his lips. "Fair enough." Life did not instantaneously revert to normal. Such transformations are rarely so abrupt. However, a different kind of quiet settled in, a quiet devoid of clandestine observers, unwelcome intrusions, or manufactured drama. It was a quiet punctuated by the occasional bark of a dog at nothing in particular, the whisper of wind through cedar branches, and the steady hum of an honest day's work. One afternoon I poured fresh concrete along the eastern fence line, anchoring it with steel bollards thick enough to halt a tank. I installed solar lights and mounted a hand-painted sign, "No trespassing, private land, HOA is not the law." A local metal shop delivered a second sign, its polished gold trim a touch too ostentatious for my preference, but I hung it nonetheless. Neighbors still visit occasionally, the ones who offered apologies, the ones who demonstrably learned a valuable lesson from these events. I bear no grudges, but my gate, I assure you, remains closed. A distinct sense of tranquility often descends after a protracted struggle. It's not the uneasy silence that hints at hidden trouble, nor the heavy quiet preceding an impending storm. No, this is the quiet that resonates like a profound exhale, like the land itself finally unclenching. Weeks, then months, elapsed following the arrest. Time gradually smoothed the sharp edges of all involved, even the lingering anger. I continued my routine, diligently repairing what was broken, mending what required attention, and tending to my land as my grandfather had meticulously taught me. Most mornings I still walked the perimeter of my property, a mug of hot coffee warming my hands, its steam rising against the crisp morning air. My dogs trotted faithfully beside me, their noses to the wind, their tails swinging rhythmically, marking a silent cadence only they could perceive. Some days I would pause near the eastern fence, the very spot where the excavator had once menacingly encroached upon my domain, where strangers had spray-painted crude crosses on my fence posts as if they owned the very earth beneath their feet. Now the area exuded an aura of quietude, reinforced and resolute. The solar lights would extinguish as the sun ascended, and the newly installed bollards cast long, deliberate shadows across the gravel pathway. They might not have been aesthetically pleasing, but they were undeniably honest. And in a world saturated with pretense, honesty possesses its own unique, intrinsic beauty. The mailbox, once a repository for an incessant stream of HOA newsletters, now held fewer such communiques and more handwritten correspondence. Some notes originated from neighbors across the road, expressing gratitude for my steadfastness. Others came from individuals I had never met, having seen my story on the news, commending my resolve and acknowledging that more people needed to stand their ground. Still others were from younger families, offering apologies for having judged me prior to knowing the full facts. I preserved them all in a drawer, not out of pride, but as a poignant reminder. Individuals err. Communities, however, are capable of far greater missteps. Yet sometimes, if presented with the unvarnished truth, they demonstrate an capacity to rectify their course. Occasionally, I would observe a resident of Clearwater Ridge walking their dog near the road. Some offered a friendly wave, while others maintained their distance. One elderly gentleman, invariably attired in suspenders and a hat, even while tending his lawn, paused at my fence one morning. "I misjudged you," he stated plainly. "No harm done," I replied. He cast a thoughtful glance at the fence, then at the gate, and finally at the expansive open land stretching out behind me. "Do you believe things will improve now that the HOA is gone?" I offered a shrug. "I believe people will either learn from this experience or they won't." He chuckled, nodded in agreement, and continued on his way. In the evenings I would sit on my porch, observing the sun melt below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple that possessed the remarkable ability to diminish the appearance of even the most daunting problems. Occasionally, I would hear the distant rumble of traffic from the highway, or the haunting calls of coyotes from beyond the dense brush, or the gentle clinking of wind chimes my grandfather had ingeniously welded from discarded tractor parts. I found myself frequently contemplating his wisdom, what he might have said, or indeed, what he would have thought about all of this. Likely, something remarkably straightforward, akin to the principle that a boundary holds meaning only if one is prepared to defend it. He was not a man of complex theories. Most individuals who dedicate their lives to working the land share this attribute. We do not require elaborate speeches to grasp the fundamental distinction between right and wrong. A line is simply a line. A falsehood is unequivocally a lie. And a gate is unequivocally a gate. There were moments in the aftermath of the court proceedings when I questioned whether this entire ordeal could have been averted. Perhaps I pondered I should have simply accepted the easement funds. Perhaps I should have kept my head down and disregarded the trespasses, the thinly veiled threats, and the calculated gamesmanship. But then I would walk that quarter-mile stretch of gravel, a path my grandfather had painstakingly carved by hand in 1967, the very same stretch they had sought to claim, and in that moment I would vividly recall the precise reason I stood my ground. It was not born of spite, nor fueled by pride, but rather from the simple, undeniable truth that this land had been bequeathed to me, not surrendered. And once you relinquish something that you have not earned, you will discover that it can never be reclaimed. Late one afternoon, Tyler stopped by. He no longer held any official capacity, merely a man who had extricated himself from a precarious situation before it completely enveloped him. He leaned against his truck and remarked, "You know, it's strange. The HOA treated you as the adversary, but you might have actually saved this entire community." "How so?" I inquired. "If Karen had continued," he stated softly, "we would all likely be facing significant debt, embroiled in legal battles, or worse. Sometimes the individual who establishes and defends the boundary is the one preventing everyone else from careening over a precipice." I offered no verbal response. None was necessary. He gave my shoulder a single firm clap before departing, a gesture of gratitude from a man who was fortunate to still possess a future unburdened by the prospect of incarceration. That night, as I proceeded to the gate to secure it for the evening, a gentle breeze rustled through the tall grass, soft and steady, carrying with it the comforting aroma of cedar and warm earth. The new sign, its polished gold trim glinting faintly in the porch light, reflected back like a small, quiet testament to retribution. I ran my hand along the cool metal, not out of vanity, but as a gesture of closure. Before returning to the house, I spoke a few words into the darkness, not loudly, and not for anyone in particular, but directed towards the land itself. My land, my rules. The wind offered no reply. It was unnecessary. Some pronouncements are forever settled once they have been vocalized.